seeing clients, but very busy today. I want to talk a little bit about narcissistic parenting. Were you raised by a narcissistic parent? What were some signs that you may have missed growing up with a parent who may be struggling with narcissism? All right, talk a little bit about this. I think this is a really important topic to navigate. And how also do we navigate narcissistic parenting, right? You might believe everyone's family is just like this, right? It's no different. My family's just like everybody else's. That silent tension and emotional confusion are how love is supposed to feel. But what if the conflict you've grown so accustomed to isn't normal? It's a signal. Conflict can be truth telling. Sometimes a lot of children and young adults who grow up in households of narcissistic parents may have fears that if I challenge or respectfully assert my needs or speak out against this parent, it's going to create backlash, right? There's going to be just a wave of conflict that I'm not necessarily prepared for. But conflict isn't always a bad thing, all right? So, conflict can be truth telling. It reveals the emotional boundaries between you and another person. And when these boundaries get blurred, right, your needs get swallowed. When your childlike longing for love, approval, or affirmation constantly collides with their need for control, conflict becomes a mirror showing who you are and who they are. Recognizing that mirror is the first step towards healing. Here is a hard truth. Clinically defined narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD, affects around 0.5% to 6.2% of people in the US, depending on the study and how traits are measured. But because many parents may carry narcissistic traits without a full disorder, such as emotional invalidation, entitlement, or need for admiration, the real number of families impacted is likely much higher than official diagnosis rates suggest. What that means for you, you may be living with a narcissistic parent, even if no clinician ever labeled them. You deserve to know this, and you deserve to name it. Because when you name it, you can begin to separate your identity from their chaos, to understand that your worth doesn't depend on their approval. And truth is, conflict and pain don't have to be the prisons holding you captive. They can become the gates to your freedom. So, indicators you might be dealing with a narcissistic parent, right? One, you feel invisible or voiceless in your own home as a young person. When you share your feelings with your parents or your desires, you are ignored, dismissed, or told you're too sensitive. Over time, you learn that silence keeps the peace, but it also kills your self worth. Many adult children raised with narcissistic parents report low self esteem, self doubt, and difficulty trusting their own feelings. Hey, what's up, Zai Huddleston? I'm not going to be able to pay too much attention to the chat, but I hope you have a better day and you have a blessed day. I hope you feel better. Sorry to hear that you're having a bad day. Hope you feel better. If you're new here, thank you so much for supporting this channel. I appreciate all the subscribers, all the likes. Try to get as much information as I can out. I don't have that much time, but I appreciate you. I hope you feel better. So another sign you might be dealing with an narcissistic parent is you find yourself constantly people pleasing and seeking approval. Maybe you say yes when you really want to say no. Maybe you overextend yourself to earn love or avoid anger. See, this is where a lot of people pleasing behaviors come from. Is a lot of times the younger person is raised in a household of a narcissistic parent. They feel like they have to overextend themselves. They feel like they have to go above and beyond just to get the affection that they need, right? They start to overextend themselves to earn love or avoid anger, or they feel guilty setting a boundary. This behavior isn't just a habit, it's survival. Hey, what's up, Suited Roblox? Hey, what's up, your favorite Ken? Hope you guys having a blessed day. I appreciate you tuning in. Even if you don't stay, I appreciate you joining. So it's a learned strategy from living under emotional pressure and conditional love. Another sign you're dealing with a narcissistic parent, you struggle to assert boundaries, or you feel guilty when you do. When you attempt to protect your emotional space, you're met with guilt trips, accusations of ingratitude, or outright anger. So if you're an adult that's struggling with boundary setting, if you're an adult that's struggling with people pleasing, it could be you grew up in a household with a parent who has narcissistic tendencies, right? Over time, this teaches you that your needs are invalid and that asserting yourself equals disrespecting them, right? That dynamic is common in families where parental narcissism influences parenting style. Another one is you second guess your own feelings and you often internalize responsibility for your parents' mood. If their anger, disappointment, or approval seems to depend on your behavior, you might find yourself constantly wondering, did I do something wrong? Right? Or what could I have done differently? Narcissistic parenting often conditions children to believe they are responsible for a parent's emotional state, right? Your sense of self worth hinges on achievements, appearance, or external validation. Instead of feeling loved for who you are, you learn to value yourself based on how you look, your grades, your success, compliments, because that's when they offered you praise. Oh, you look so good today. Oh, you look, a lot of these insecurities as I'm going through this list that I work with within adults, people that are 50, 60 years old, it could be really a product of narcissistic parenting. Oh, thank you for joining. I appreciate you, Zai. It could be a product of narcissistic parenting. All right. So it says, when that praise becomes the bar for your worth, you may grow into a person defined by performance, not identity. All right. You have patterns of anxiety, depression, or chronic self doubt. Research links perceived parental narcissism with increased rates of anxiety and depression in children and young adults, especially when behaviors like scapegoating or emotional neglect are present. You find it difficult to trust your own reality. Events, memories, emotions feel fuzzy. Narcissistic parents often gaslight or distort the truth. Over time, you may begin doubting your own memory or emotions, wondering if you were being too dramatic. That's a sign your inner sense of reality is being undermined by the parent's need for control. You avoid expressing independence or ambition, or fear their reaction if you do. A parent with narcissistic traits may feel threatened by your autonomy, wanting to keep you dependent on them. So you shrink your dreams, dim your light, or hide your hopes. That fear often becomes internalized and sticks with you into adulthood. You struggle to form healthy relationships or authentic attachments. Because love felt conditional and emotional support was inconsistent, you may fear intimacy, crave external validation, or feel unworthy of true respect. Many children of narcissistic parents find themselves caught in insecure or codependent relationships later in adult life. You feel a deep inner conflict, a longing for love, approval, yet a growing resentment, confusion, and desire for distance. That inner war isn't weakness, it's awareness. It's your real self fighting for survival against learned dysfunction, right? So, some indicators and some signs that you could, be dealing with a narcissistic parent, all right? This is really common in US culture where a lot of us are just kind of driven by, those feelings of grandiosity, right? And that need for attention and praise, right? And parents are no exceptions to this. They absolutely are not. So, how to navigate narcissistic parents, right? How do you navigate this territory? How do you navigate this condition in your family, right? So it says here conflict in your family hasn't always meant something was wrong. Sometimes it meant something was finally telling the truth. You've been taught to avoid conflict with your parent because their reactions overshadow everything. But conflict is simply the moment when two sets of emotional needs collide. It reveals where the invisible boundaries between you and them actually exist. All right. And you need that information because when those differences stay hidden, you absorb the belief that your needs don't really matter and they shouldn't matter, that your voice disrupts peace, and that you must shrink to maintain the balance. But conflict exposes the truth. You and your parent are two separate people with two separate emotional worlds. And recognizing that separation is often the beginning of freedom. Conflict is not always a bad thing, right? Sometimes a lot of younger people are afraid to use their voice to really advocate for themselves against a narcissistic parent out of fear of conflict, out of fear of, oh my God, if I say this, she's not gonna, maybe she won't feed me, maybe she won't like me, maybe she won't love me, right? But conflict isn't always a bad thing because it's a way that you can express that, your needs and that parents' needs and your values and their values are different, right? That you're a human being, that you're unique, right? In a lot of narcissistic households, there's a lot of an enmeshment and there's not really clear boundaries set. So they tend to kind of fuse with each other and kind of, lock in on each other where they don't allow each other to have their own thoughts and their own emotional reactions, right? In a lot of narcissistic households. So it says you also learn that not all conflict is destructive. Some conflict is diagnostic. It reveals where you've been over functioning, over giving, or over accepting behavior that damages your sense of worth. Research in family systems theory shows that enmeshment, and this is when personal boundaries are blurred or they just don't exist, predicts lower self esteem, increased anxiety, and difficulty forming an autonomous identity. Right? When you grow up in an emotionally fused environment, you become afraid that any attempt to express individuality will cause rejection. So you stay silent, right? You stay silent, you don't say anything, even when your spirit is suffocating. But you can break that system by learning to value your inner voice as much as your parent demands you value theirs. This is where spirituality, faith, and self validation matter. Because when your parent cannot or will not validate your experience, you must learn how to anchor your identity to something deeper than their approval. You learn to say, God saw me even when my parent didn't. You learn that self validation is not arrogance, it is emotional oxygen. Scripture reminds you that you are fearfully and wonderfully made, which means your experiences, boundaries, and emotional reactions are not mistakes. They are signals from God that something in your relational ecosystem needs repairing. So finally, you learn that navigating a relationship with a narcissistic parent does not mean you must cut them off. It means you must no longer cut yourself off from yourself. You learn boundaries, emotional distance, support systems, mentors, healthy family members, journaling as truth telling, and the wisdom to stop internalizing their pessimism, cynicism, or projection that was never yours to carry. You learn to love them without abandoning you. All right. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I don't have really a whole lot of time, but right, put some points on narcissistic parenting and how to navigate this. So it says you stop expecting a narcissistic parent to become who you need them to be. If you're dealing with a parent who is showing you indicators of narcissism, right? That feelings of grandiosity, that self-inflation, my needs are more important than your needs. This dynamic where you almost feel like even you asserting your needs is going to create conflict or there's fear there. Remodifying your expectations of this parent. Is it realistic for me to assume that this parent is going to be able to meet my needs in the way that I need them to? Right? When you're old enough and you're able to think for yourself, this is the time to start remodifying your expectations of your parents. Sometimes you have to do that, right? Parents are not always right, right? They're not always the voice of reason. A lot of them sometimes are coming from trauma, difficulties from their childhood, from your grandparents that hasn't been resolved, right? They're human beings too. So being able to modify your expectations, right? Is the reality of the situation or the circumstance of this narcissistic parent or parent who's displaying narcissism going to meet my expectations, right? It's very important. So it says here, you learn that narcissistic traits, grandiosity, entitlement, emotional invalidation are not cured by your compliance or your pain. Research shows that narcissistic parents often struggle with empathy due to fragile self-esteem masked as superiority. This is from Milan, 2011. When you stop trying to earn love and begin accepting emotional reality, you free yourself from the trap of false hope, right? This is not abandonment. This is truth, and the truth sets you free to build confidence from within rather than waiting for someone who cannot consistently offer it. So ask yourself, am I modifying my expectations of my parents, even as an adult? Right? A lot of times, the higher the expectation, the higher the frustration, right? So sometimes you have to modify and you have to dig up some of these predictions, okay? Two, you begin practicing radical self validation, okay? Says a narcissistic parent often dismisses or mocks your emotions. So you learn that self validation becomes your survival tool. DBT research notes that validating your internal experiences reduces emotional reactivity and strengthens identity stability. Linehan, 1993. You remind yourself, my feeling is real even if they deny it. You document your truth in a journal, right? Speak it out loud or pray it to God, not because you need permission to feel, but because your internal world deserves acknowledgement. You learn to become the witness of your own life. In the Black community, we absolutely need to get in the habit of validating ourselves, especially if we're growing up in households where there's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of conflict, there's not a lot of validation, there's not a lot of comfort, right? And you see this as extensions in a lot of the adults in the Black community where they can't offer that to others, right? This is why we have so much crime amongst our Black men, because they're not able to give what they haven't received, right? So we have to pour that into ourselves, right? So you learn to set boundaries without needing their approval. Healthy boundaries are not rebellion, they are stewardship of your emotional well being. Study shows that boundary setting improves self confidence and reduces enmeshment related stress, right? That codependency. This is from Rosenberg and Pace, 2018. You define what you will and will not allow, even if they accuse you of being disrespectful or ungrateful. You don't set boundaries to punish them, you set boundaries so you can remain connected without being consumed, right? Four, you learn the power of emotional detachment, not disrespect. Emotional detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. You stop reacting to every guilt trip, insult, or manipulation. You recognize when their inner child, not their adult self, is speaking. Research in trauma psychology shows that detachment helps break automatic emotional fusion patterns. Bowen, 1976. You give yourself permission to stay grounded even when their emotions escalate, right? Black folks, we like to, every time our mom says something, our dad says something we don't agree with, we got to say something back. We're fighting back, we're rebuttaling, we're doing all this kind of communication back. It's not always necessary, right? Sometimes it's more healthier to draw the line, reframe the experience. Maybe this is this person's, my parents' inner child, or maybe when they grew up, they had some injuries or some difficulties. Maybe this is that stuff speaking, right? It's a lot of it is our interpretation and our perspective that makes a big difference. Two truths can coexist. Yes, this isn't right. I don't agree with this. This isn't fair. However, what is an interpretation that you can use that can help you walk away from the situation with your integrity, right? You can have coexisting interpretations in that situation. It's not like an all or nothing perspective you need to adopt, right, to fully thrive in that circumstance, right? So another one, you recognize their behavior is about their wounds, not your worth. Narcissistic parents often externalize their insecurities through criticism or control. Understanding this reduces personalization, right? One of the biggest predictors of low self-esteem in children of narcissistic parents. You stop absorbing their emotional poison as truth, and you remind yourself their reaction is a reflection of them, not a prophecy about me. And last but not least, you seek out mentors, coaches, and healthy adults who model real love. A narcissistic parent cannot be your only emotional blueprint. Research on resilience shows that supportive, non parental adults dramatically improve mental health, identity formation, and life satisfaction. Warner and Smith, 1982. You learn that God often sends replacement voices, whether it be your pastors, your family, friends, teachers, who show you how healthy adults communicate. Apologize, validate, and lead. All right. So, just wanted to give you guys some tools on how to navigate narcissistic parenting. Not really expecting a lot of viewership from this. I kind of just threw this together last minute. I had a little space of break. So I hope this reaches who it needs to reach. And you guys have a blessed day. I'm out.